Fermentation might sound like a complex science term, but it's actually a simple and enjoyable way to preserve vegetables and enhance their taste. Imagine yourself in a warm Amish kitchen, filled with the earthy smell of fresh produce. There's a big bowl of cabbage ready to be transformed into sauerkraut, and the anticipation is high. What is fermentation? I still remember my first try at fermenting vegetables. I was aiming for a culinary masterpiece, but it ended up looking more like a science experiment that didn't go quite as planned. However, the magic of fermentation is that when it's done right, it doesn't just preserve food, it turns it into something tasty and nutritious. So, what really happens during fermentation? It's a fascinating process where helpful bacteria, especially lactic acid bacteria, feed on the natural sugars in vegetables. As they work, they produce lactic acid, which gives fermented foods their distinctive tangy taste. It's like hosting a lively party in a jar, where the bacteria are the main guests, transforming the food into something unique. And here's the cool part. While these bacteria are busy, they're also creating probiotics, which are fantastic for your gut health. Think of probiotics as tiny cheerleaders for your stomach, supporting digestion and boosting your immune system every time you crunch into a pickled veggie. A tradition rooted in history. Did you know that people have been fermenting food for thousands of years? Ancient cultures in China, Egypt, and Mesopotamia were using fermentation to extend the life of their produce. They discovered that this simple technique could turn ordinary vegetables into tasty, long-lasting foods, a bit like a natural, slow magic that only requires some salt and a bit of patience. The Amish art of fermentation. Fermentation isn't just about tossing veggies into a jar and hoping for the best. It's a practice of patience, something the Amish have mastered. They know the exact timing to let their vegetables reach the perfect level of tanginess. It's a bit like waiting for a new season of your favorite show. It might feel like it takes forever, but when that tangy goodness is finally ready, it's worth every minute of waiting. In my experience, it's best to check on the fermenting vegetables occasionally, but not so much that you start chatting with them like they're old friends. The Amish understand that not all vegetables are suited for fermentation. They wisely choose hearty, flavorful veggies that can handle the process, unlike delicate greens like lettuce, which don't quite work the same way. The Amish approach fermentation with care, tradition, and a dash of fun, turning simple ingredients into vibrant, long-lasting foods packed with flavor and health benefits. Cabbage, carrots, and cucumbers are timeless choices for fermentation, each bringing its own unique flavor and texture. Take cabbage, for example. It transforms into tangy sauerkraut, adding a crunchy zing to a bratwurst or even a casserole. Then there are pickled carrots, adding a burst of color and flavor to salads and sandwiches that's hard to resist. The freshness of these vegetables is key. Amish gardens, often overflowing with homegrown goodness, provide the perfect starting point for this process. Harvesting vegetables at their peak makes all the difference. I once tried to ferment some slightly wilted veggies from the back of my fridge, thinking I'd mastered fermentation. Spoiler alert, they turned into something I wouldn't even dare taste. If you're getting into fermentation, make sure to start with the freshest produce you can find. It's like picking the best ingredients for a favorite recipe, and it truly elevates the final product. There's also something incredibly satisfying about handpicking your veggies straight from the garden. It's a small but meaningful connection to the earth and deepens your appreciation for the food you're about to create. Picture the sun gleaming on ripe cucumbers, the earthy scent of fresh carrots just pulled from the ground. It's almost like a mini adventure, setting the stage for a delightful journey in fermentation. You might even feel a bit like a farmer, taking pride in selecting your produce, adding a touch of garden glamour to your day. And speaking of cucumbers, they're the stars of pickling. Fermented cucumbers become crisp, flavorful pickles, perfect with sandwiches or as a tasty snack on their own. It's amazing how a simple cucumber can transform into something so versatile with the power of fermentation. A sprinkle of salt and a bit of patience can go a long way. The magic of fermentation truly begins with salting. It's not just a simple sprinkle of salt here and there. It's an essential step that ensures your crisp veggies become flavorful delights. Think of salt as the gatekeeper, that allows only the right bacteria to thrive. For the Amish, salt does more than enhance flavor. It creates an environment that supports helpful bacteria while keeping harmful ones at bay. Who would have thought that seasoning could be so powerful? When you add salt to vegetables, it pulls out moisture, which then combines with the salt to form a preserving brine. As moisture is drawn out, the mixture's pH level decreases. This lower pH helps make your fermented veggies safer to eat and enhances their flavor. Imagine the veggies gaining tiny protective shields, ready to defend against any spoilage. But this process isn't just about tossing in a handful of salt. The Amish aim for a precise salt ratio, typically about 2 to 3% of the total vegetable weight. So if you have a pound of cabbage, you'd use around 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt. It may sound small, but it makes a big difference. As the salted veggies begin to ferment, they start to soften and release their natural sugars. You can almost feel the anticipation building, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Only this transformation ends up in a jar instead of a garden. Over time, the vegetables develop that distinctive tangy flavor we all love. Speaking of flavor, I learned a valuable lesson when I first tried fermenting. Thinking a bit more salt would add extra flavor, I overdid it. Let's just say my batch ended up more like a salty brine than anything tasty. My friends still laugh about that overly salted batch of cucumbers. Who knew that a bit too much salt could ruin an entire batch? And then there's the fermentation crock. This is where your salted veggies go to transform. These traditional crocks, used by the Amish for generations, offer the perfect environment for fermentation. And they've perfected this process down to an art. Fermentation crocks, typically made of clay, are designed with a clever water-sealed lid. This setup is brilliant. The water moat around the lid keeps air out while allowing fermentation gases to escape. It's like giving your veggies their own little spa, where they can peacefully ferment without any unwelcome guests. Imagine your veggies relaxing by the pool, soaking in brine. I remember my first attempt at fermenting vegetables. I decided to use an old glass jar instead of a traditional crock, thinking it would work just as well. Let's just say the jar had other ideas. One morning, I woke up to a kitchen that smelled like a pickle factory explosion, with brine and veggies everywhere. That was when I realized I wasn't just after tangy veggies. I also needed to prevent a complete kitchen disaster. After that, I invested in a quality fermentation crock that wouldn't cause chaos in the middle of the night. When it comes to choosing a crock, size matters. The Amish often use crocks that hold several quarts, which is perfect for making large batches to share at family gatherings or to store for the winter months. It's also an ideal way to use up extra garden vegetables. A large crock means plenty of delicious fermented goodies to enjoy. Now, if you don't have a fancy fermentation crock, no problem. You can still ferment in wide-mouthed jars as long as they're sturdy enough to handle the pressure from fermentation gases. Some people even use food-safe plastic containers. Just be cautious so you don't end up with an unexpected pop. As your veggies soak in the brine inside the crock, you'll see bubbling and fizzing. That's a great sign. Those bubbles mean the beneficial bacteria are hard at work, breaking down sugars and creating tasty acids. You can almost imagine them cheering each other on. Let's make these veggies amazing. To ensure a steady fermentation process, keep your crock in a cool, dark spot, away from sunlight. The Amish know that patience is key, but the wait only builds anticipation for the delicious end result. An essential part of the process is keeping the veggies fully submerged in brine. Exposed veggies can invite unwanted mold. The Amish have various clever ways to weigh down the vegetables, from clean stones to specially designed glass weights. In fact, they probably have a stash of perfect stones collected from their yards, carefully chosen for each fermentation adventure. I once tried to improvise with an old brick from my garden. It seemed like a good idea until it floated to the top, ignoring my attempts to keep it down. My sauerkraut must have felt like it was on a floating vacation. Eventually, I rummaged through the yard looking for a better weight, only to find one perfect stone, except it was home to an entire ant family. Lesson learned. I can just imagine the ants saying, "Hey, where are you taking our home?" It's all fun and games until you've got a little ant parade in your fermentation jar. The key is finding something clean, safe, and heavy enough to keep the veggies submerged. When your vegetables are fully under the brine, they're free to ferment without worrying about mold sneaking in. The Amish are pros at this, often using rocks or weights that fit perfectly in their crocks, ensuring the brine covers every bit of the veggies. It's like wrapping the vegetables in a cozy, salty blanket. Now, don't forget the science here. Adding the right weight ensures the brine keeps the veggies down and helps create an anaerobic or oxygen-free environment. In this oxygen-free space, the beneficial bacteria thrive, making the veggies perfectly tangy and flavorful. So, as you set your vegetables in place, remember, whether it's a sturdy rock or a glass weight, keeping those veggies under the brine will have your taste buds thanking you later for that perfectly fermented crunch. Once the veggies are submerged and weighed down, the hardest part begins, waiting for the fermentation magic to happen. This is where the Amish really excel, knowing precisely how long to let their veggies ferment for that ideal tanginess. It's like waiting for a freshly baked pie to cool. It's tough, but totally worth it. The fermentation time can vary widely depending on temperature, the type of vegetable, and your taste. For example, sauerkraut can take from a week to a month to reach peak flavor. During this period, you'll want to check on your veggies regularly, using your nose to guide you. It's a delicate balance. Too little time, and the veggies might still be crunchy and bland. Too long, and they could become extra sour, which might be a bit too intense for some. I once thought I could speed things up by placing my jar on a sunny windowsill. Let's just say that was a big mistake. A week later, I returned to a jar that looked more like a failed science project than anything edible. The smell? A strong reminder to respect the fermentation process. It's a journey, not a race. The Amish, relying on their well-honed intuition, often taste a sample to judge the flavor. It's a bit like knowing exactly when to pull cookies from the oven, too soon or too late, and you won't get the best result. You're looking for the right level of sourness that will make those perfectly fermented veggies a delight in your next meal. During this waiting time, keep an eye out for any mold. If you see a little fuzzy spot on top, don't panic. Just scoop it off, and your ferment is still safe to eat. The key is to keep the veggies fully submerged. Otherwise, they might invite mold to the surface. It's a bit like an uninvited guest showing up to a party, not exactly welcome. When your fermented veggies hit the sweet spot, you'll be amazed at how rewarding the process is. The bright, tangy flavors will make all the waiting worth it, and you'll realize you've created something wholesome and nourishing that you can enjoy year-round. Now that you've mastered the art of fermentation and have jars full of delicious, tangy treasures, it's time to think about storage. The Amish have their ways of keeping these treats fresh and ready for winter. And with a few tips, you can do the same. You've just spent hours perfecting your batch of sauerkraut, and now you want it to last longer than a carton of milk left out on a sweltering day. Proper storage is key, and the Amish have a simple yet effective way of keeping their fermented vegetables fresh. They often place them in cool, dark places like root cellars or basements, which help maintain a stable temperature. It's a bit like finding the best hiding spot in your house for snacks. Out of sight, out of mind. Keeping your fermented creations away from light and heat not only preserves their vibrant colors, but also extends their shelf life, allowing you to enjoy their flavors well beyond the growing season. It's remarkable to note that properly stored fermented vegetables can last up to a year or more. That's right, a whole year of crisp, tangy goodness ready to enhance any meal, making it a fantastic way to ensure you have nutritious options during the coldest months. It's like pulling out your favorite sweater just when you need it most. Familiar and comforting, even if it hasn't been out in a while. In my own experiments with fermenting, I learned the hard way that storage matters. I once thought it would be a good idea to store my fermented carrots in a sunny kitchen cabinet. Let's just say that after a week, opening that cabinet was like getting hit with a smell that suggested my fresh veggies had soured. Lesson learned. Keep them out of the sun, like avoiding an uninvited ex at a family event. Once you've found the perfect storage spot, don't forget about sealing those jars tightly. This keeps the delicious, tangy flavor in and unwelcome guests out. Think of it as giving your veggies a cozy little blanket, tucked in and safe from the outside world. And don't overlook the importance of labeling. Once, I mixed up my jars and ended up putting pickled beets in my chili instead of my favorite fermented carrots. Not exactly the flavor I was hoping for. Labeling lets you keep track of your fermentation bounty, so you always know what delicious surprise is waiting in the pantry. Now that your fermented veggies are safely stored away, let's talk about how to make them the stars of your meals. The Amish are masters at weaving these tangy treats into everyday dishes, transforming simple meals into something truly delightful. Think of your fermented veggies as the secret ingredient that can elevate a meal from ordinary to exceptional, like finding a hidden stash of chocolate when you thought your sweets were all gone. Placing a bit of sauerkraut on a hot dog or bratwurst is a game changer. That crunchy, sour bite pairs perfectly with the juicy sausage, creating a flavor combination that practically shouts, "This is what summer cookouts are all about." And if you're up for experimenting, try adding a spoonful of sauerkraut to a grilled cheese sandwich. The extra tang is like a surprise party for your taste buds. Fermented veggies aren't just for meats. They bring life to salads in surprising ways. Toss in some pickles or add a dollop of kimchi, and a plain salad suddenly becomes a zesty masterpiece. I remember making a salad for a gathering, proudly adding my homemade pickled carrots and calling it gourmet. The next day, my friends lovingly teased me about the Great Carrot Incident because a little too much brine found its way into the bowl. It became an inside joke, but we definitely shared a good laugh. Fermented vegetables can shine in stir-fries too. Imagine tossing fresh veggies in a pan, then adding a few spoonfuls of kimchi toward the end. It brings a kick that makes the whole dish sing. A friend once tried this but accidentally added an entire jar of kimchi to the pan. She ended up with a Korean-style stir-fry gone rogue, a little spicy, but delicious enough that we couldn't stop eating. Don't forget breakfast. Adding sauerkraut to scrambled eggs or an omelet can give your morning meal a delightful zing. I once decided to mix leftover fermented cabbage into my eggs on a Sunday morning, and while my daughter was skeptical at first, it ended up being a hit. Now, she even requests sauerkraut eggs for brunch. These days, fermentation is having a moment in the culinary world. Trendy foods like kimchi, kombucha, and fermented hot sauces are all the rage, with people buzzing about their health benefits and bold flavors. But let's take a moment to appreciate the Amish approach, which is all about simplicity and tradition. While everyone else experiments with quirky flavor blends, the Amish quietly perfect their age-old recipes that have truly stood the test of time. It's like comparing a classic novel to the latest bestseller. One holds lasting wisdom, while the other may be forgotten by next season. Now, don't get me wrong, there's something thrilling about modern fermentation trends. Who doesn't love a spicy kimchi that wakes up your taste buds? But have you ever stopped to look at the price tag on those fancy jars at the store? If you're thinking about stocking up on some of those trendy fermented items, you might need to take out a loan. Meanwhile, the Amish keep their fermentation methods simple and budget-friendly, relying on their gardens and the timeless knowledge passed down through generations. In their world, it's not about the latest ingredient or trend. It's about preserving what's in season and crafting something delicious that lasts. I once had an experience with modern fermentation at a local market that left me a bit perplexed. I was lured by a jar of artisanal pickles, claiming to be made with a secret blend of spices. The vendor went on and on about how these pickles were lovingly crafted and aged to perfection. Curious, I splurged a little, but when I took a bite, I could barely taste the cucumber. Just an overwhelming explosion of flavors that was more confusing than tasty. I couldn't help but think the Amish would have chuckled at my adventure. They'd just throw cucumbers, salt, and maybe a few spices into a crock, and voila, no fuss, just deliciousness. What's so great about the Amish approach is its simplicity and authenticity. For them, fermentation isn't just a passing trend, it's a way of life. They make the most of their homegrown produce, creating flavorful, nutrient-dense foods that get them through the tough winter months. They're not concerned with impressing anyone with fancy labels or gourmet packaging. They're simply focused on enjoying what nature provides. Looking at the rise of fermentation in today's food scene, it's worth remembering that while trends come and go, the principles of traditional methods remain timeless. The Amish remind us that fermentation can be both a science and an art, without the need for bells and whistles. It's a lesson in how the best things in life are often the simplest, rooted deeply in history. If you've ever been curious about diving into the world of fermentation, now's the perfect time. Embracing this ancient practice not only connects you to your food in a meaningful way, but adds a fun twist to your meals. The Amish have perfected fermenting vegetables, and so can you. Imagine yourself in the kitchen, surrounded by fresh veggies and a pinch of salt, ready to create something special. The best part? You don't need to be a gourmet chef to start, just a willingness to try and maybe a little patience. Because after all, good things take time. Think about how satisfying it would feel to open a jar of your homemade sauerkraut in the middle of winter, knowing you created that tangy goodness from scratch. It's like having a garden party in a jar, without the sunburn. Of course, your fermentation journey might have a few bumps along the way, like the time I confused a carrot with a cucumber and ended up with a strange mix, but that's all part of the fun. You'll be learning and laughing throughout the process. Fermentation is all about experimenting, and if you happen to make a mistake, consider it a delicious lesson. And don't forget the health benefits. Fermented foods are packed with probiotics, those beneficial bacteria that keep our digestive system happy. Research shows that these little bacteria can support digestion and boost the immune system. So, every time you bite into your homemade pickles or sauerkraut, you're not only enjoying a tasty treat, but you're also fueling your body with nourishment. It's like giving your gut a warm hug. So grab those veggies, put on your favorite apron, and get ready to transform your kitchen into a fermentation haven. Whether you're preparing for winter or simply adding a bit of excitement to your meals, the art of fermentation is calling. You might just discover that the laughter, community, and tradition that come with it are the best ingredients of all. Let's get fermenting.